Morning, everyone, and welcome back to our keynote morning session for the second day of content for our Investable Showcase 2020 virtual. Last week, we had a lot of discussions around convergence in different technologies and in business models. And one of those, which we're going to be delving into a little bit more detail now, is that of consumer health and the trends and the impacts of consumer health on the healthcare systems and the investment opportunities that are arising from this trend of more consumerization of healthcare. So I'm delighted to hand you over to our moderator for this morning's panel, David Mardle with Goodwin. David, the stage is yours.
Thanks, Josh, and hello, everybody. Good morning. Yes, I'm David Mardle, partner in Goodwin's Tech and Life Sciences team here in the UK. Delighted to be moderating here and to introduce you to our panelists. Looking forward to a great conversation. I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves to you first, and then we'll go into the questions. If I may start then, please, with Janke.
Yeah, good morning. I'm Janke Dittmar. I'm a general partner with Gilde Healthcare. Gilde is a transatlantic venture and growth capital fund with about 1.4 billion euros under management. We invest across health tech, so that includes med tech, digital health, consumer health, diagnostics and life science tools, as well as in Europe in therapeutics, and have been around for a while. We're investing from our fifth fund, which is a $450 million vehicle. And some of the recent investments with a relation to consumer health are Big Health, Eago, and Withings. I'll come back to that in a moment. Really great to be here this morning, David.
Brilliant, thanks, Janke. And next, maybe Miri.
Hello, everyone. My name is Miri Polachek. I'm with Joy Ventures. We are a startup studio that builds and invests in companies developing consumer products for well-being. We're a relatively young organization. We've been around just for several years. We have 8 portfolio companies, and we get involved in most cases very early with companies, but support them through their journey to the market.
Fantastic, thanks, Mary. And turning to Amanda.
Hello, I'm Amanda Getchapro. I'm a partner with the Venture Partners. We're a Paris-based fund. We're investing in life science quite broadly across life science and healthcare, from biotech largely, also to significant interest in digital health, including consumer health. And quite unusually as well, we also look into food and nutrition. So our sweet spot is around Series A, but we'll invest on either side of that depending on opportunity. Our assets under management are around 800 million euro collectively across all of our funds. And our most recent fund, Health for Life Capital 2, is north of 200 million euro. Wonderful,
thank you. And turning now to Vijay.
Thank you, David. Hi, everyone. I'm Vijay Bharathan. I'm with Optum Ventures Global, part of Optum Ventures based in London, and we look at health tech, digital health on a global scale, looking at UK, Europe, Israel, Asia, even Canada, and work closely with our Boston colleagues to look for digital health investments, Series A, B, again, flexibility either side of that. And we have about 600 million across the entire fund.
Fantastic. And our final panelist is Galit.
Hi, I'm Galit Horowitz. I'm co-founder of WellTech One, a wellness fund and innovation hub in Tel Aviv, Israel. We invest in and accelerate wellness technology startups. We're a wellness-centric fund and have invested in fitness, nutrition, beauty, medical device, nutrition supplements, stress, and wellness gaming.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So turning to our questions, I think it's clear just from the introductions alone how broad a space this is. And so what I'd like to start with, and Janke, this is for you, if I may, to look at an area that is both B2C and B2B. Both models seem to be able to thrive in this broad spectrum. In some cases, businesses seem to be starting at B2C and then migrating to B2B, and possibly vice versa. I was wondering if you could talk us through how you see companies working through this spectrum.
Yeah, with pleasure. So I think to start with, the business models in consumer health and of consumer health are a bit of a mindset on top of being either B2C or B2B. I think the idea of seeing the patient in healthcare as a patient consumer is the most important change that you need to sort of embrace when you're looking at consumer health companies. And the reason why we originally got interested is because of patient centricity. So the idea that we wanted to deliver patient-centric healthcare already about 10 years ago, and we looked at various business models around it. I came from Philips, so that's a company that's both in the consumer domain and in the healthcare domain has increasingly been working towards sort of convergence. And I think going forward, I would say that the most important business model observation from my side is that you need to put the patient at the center of any product that you bring forward, even if you're selling to someone else in the value chain. And I think this is also important when you're looking at the deeper differentiation between B2C and B2B. So for example, with our recent investments of Withings, which is a leader in IoT devices for connected health, coming out of France. So with some minor competitors like Apple, Google, Samsung, and Amazon was recently doing extremely well in that space. And why is it doing well? Because in the B2C, they have managed to achieve what none of these other device makers have achieved, which is to get very high retention. So consumers love the products, and they love to interact with the products. And at 1 year, it's a sort of 90% retention rate. At 10 years, even for the connected scales, we still get 50% uploading data every month. And that idea of having a customer, delighting customers in a way that they want to engage with your products means that you suddenly create a lot of value for the B2B. Because what matters in healthcare is ultimately, we call it then compliance, and are people taking their meds, or are they checking their vital signs on a regular basis if they're on a diabetes prevention program. So if you have that capability on the one side of customer intimacy, high retentions, and on the other side, you're able to manufacture at million scale at very low cost. Because in healthcare, everything needs to be affordable as well, right? We want to do, that's our motto, affordable care for patients, better care at lower cost. That can be a killer combination in a positive sense. You keep people engaged, and you can do it with devices that work at massive scale. So if somebody calls us and says, we need 100,000 scales next month, that's something that we can do. And this is something where traditional medtech and healthcare companies are struggling. So this is where our investment thesis for Withings came from. So take that strength from B2C and apply it in remote patient monitoring, diabetes prevention programs, digital health. So be the partner of choice when it comes to devices in IoT, in healthcare. And partnering is very important in that, because in B2B, you can't do it alone.
You're on mute, David.
Rookie error, sorry. I think after a few years of COVID, I will have worked out how to use Zoom. Yeah, so as I was saying to myself, that's a pretty compelling example, Withings, of this opportunity for both B2C and B2B, sometimes in the same business, which is amazing. I think though, Miri, again, from the point of view of the consumer, all of these things, it seems to me, and I'm sure to many others, work on the need of a very high level of trust. Am I a consumer? Am I a patient? Am I both? Clearly, I'm an individual above all. When you looked at businesses, how do you see businesses respond to that particular challenge?
So first of all, absolutely, trust is necessary, whether we're talking about a consumer product or a healthcare product. First and foremost, trust needs to be earned, and we primarily see that happening through proof of efficacy, proof of measurable outcome, some kind of meaningful effect that the product is generating, creating for its user. And this is something that we focus on a lot at Joy when we work with our companies, figuring out what is the best way to prove that value that the product is bringing to the consumer, whether it's measuring how a product reduces stress, or whether it's a reduction of or an increasing in focus and attention, the ability to measure that through either conducting various types of user studies and trials, in some case more clinical, in some case less, but oftentimes, we've seen both journeys. We've seen companies kind of starting more in the, let's say, in the more clinical space. Oftentimes, if the technologies are more kind of deep kind of science-based technologies, they'll oftentimes start on a clinical path, kind of doing the more kind of regulated traditional path, and then coming out to the consumer space. And sometimes it's the other way around, right, where they're kind of proving themselves and their efficacy in the consumer realm, and then once they've proven that value in the consumer market, then they're starting to experiencing the pull from kind of businesses, enterprises, payers, and they start moving more towards the B2B channel. But no matter where they start and how they prove their efficacy, they do need to gain that trust in that process.
And can you just thinking about that in the context of what Janke was saying around moving towards models which are using data as a currency of value, so you're becoming a service to other businesses. Do you think the consumer is alive to that and is accepting of that, or is ignorant of that at the moment?
Well, I think it's still early days, but people are becoming increasingly comfortable, I think, with the fact that data is being collected about themselves, because they recognize the value that it can then give to them in experiences that are helping them specifically to their tailored need and at the right time in the right place. I think people are, they do look at the fine print, but they are more willing to share their data and to be open to that, to having them their vitals, and the various information about their behavior shared.
Yeah. And Janke, just coming back to you in the Withings example, without obviously being specific to Withings confidential data, this must be an issue that the board there is alive to all the time, is not to lose that trust inadvertently, basically.
Absolutely, and this is really important that there's full transparency. We've also experienced that in our diligence of Big Health, where I led investment earlier this year, which is one of the most advanced digital therapeutics companies out there for insomnia and also for anxiety and worry, all of which are traits that we've probably all experienced during COVID and during the American election. They basically started with a direct-to-consumer model and then pivoted to B2B over the years, finding a sweet spot in the employer health system. And when we're dealing with employees and their employers, it's particularly sensitive. What happens with data? So is my employer seeing that I'm going to bed really late and watching Netflix every night, or that my productivity apparently isn't as high as it could be right now? But in the US, I think there's an increasing level of trust because there's a synergistic effect. Employees realize that employers care and they want to invest in their employees to improve their health. And in the midst of Corona, we've seen that sort of on a massive scale, where we decided, hey, we need to contribute, and offered a community access program with these products for free. And 6 million people essentially were signed up via their employers in a very short period of time. So I think it's something we need to be very cognizant of. We can never, sell the data, never do anything that users wouldn't approve of. Like sell the data to pharma or something like that. That would be taking away the soul of these companies. You build the trust. But with Withings, we found that in the middle of COVID, as a result of having all that data, we were able to refute a lot of the theses that were going around by governments and commentators about, people putting on weight during lockdown and exercising less. We were able to show on a scale of millions of users in the US and in Europe that at least those people with an IoT scale, they were actually exercising more. And they were not necessarily putting on weight, maybe losing weight even, because they were eating healthier and they're spending less time in stressful commute situations. They were going to bed later, but they also woke up later because they didn't have to commute to work. So in the end, they got more sleep. So the overall effect on health was very positive. Now, those population health insights, you wouldn't be able to get without users ultimately trusting you with their data.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point. That last one around, the phenomena of COVID, if you like, an accelerator of trends of people that were increasingly interested in their own health, and then hopefully by extrapolation, how their data might help with broader outcomes for people. I think that's probably one of the more interesting things that have happened over the last few months, to see this acceleration. Amanda, you have seen this, I'm sure. Can you just comment on how it's impacted what you've seen in terms of investment propositions and for your portfolio companies?
Yeah, sure. So I think the COVID was almost coming into a perfect storm, where many of the foundations the trends had already been starting, and certainly there was a foundation for making things happen. But the adoption was still very much amongst early adopters, and that's really across the board. So that's across the board from consumers, the providers of platforms and providing access to these platforms, regulatory, etc. And so with COVID really provided a necessity, which really gave the impetus then to unravel kind of the hesitations and really push the ecosystem forward. So then we see consumers who might not otherwise have had exposure to digital offerings in health were then being forced or made open to such options. And I guess telemedicine is probably the biggest area where there's really an explosion of usage there. So governments really kind of freeing up the use of telemedicine, and then physicians themselves who had once been very, very conservative on the use of this. And I mean, in Germany, the federal government was talking about figures of something like around 7% pre-COVID, and then moving up to about 60% usage across the medical community. And so this is a big difference, so that you have not just the demand from consumers, but also the push also from the providers. And so that's been a big difference. Then also we saw the beginning, as Janke and Miro were talking about, where you have the involvement also of other actors. So you have employers who are really more attentive of their employees, so really ensuring that things are in place to ensure that the health of their employees, both from an employee loyalty perspective, to show that they do care, but also from the point of view of a business wanting to make sure that the employees are as productive as possible. So we see platforms. We've invested in a company, MarketFit, in Germany, who's working through the employers to provide health and wellness offerings to employees. And here, yeah, we see quite an impact. Then as well, in terms of the consumer engagement, we also see, naturally, we see tech giants coming into the fray, already been in the fray, but also accelerating that. But we also see retail giants coming in. So in the US, we see players such as Walmart really had already begun with their clinics alongside their supermarkets. And now they're really accelerating their telemedicine and their digital offerings as well. And so we see kind of coming from all sectors. And in addition to that, with the startups who are always quite nimble, being able to bring new offerings, seeing opportunity. And as you say, in mental health is an area of big growth. And again, because of these startups are coming, developing and really scaling, which is so necessary for these consumer products, then investment opportunities are also coming forward. And certainly in the investment in the space has been very, very healthy in 2020. And so we see the biggest investment across the globe exceeding that of the kind of the peak that was seen in 2018. So, yeah. So definitely that has been a silver lining of COVID.
So I guess it struck me as you were talking, though, as an investor, you must be trying to work out how much of this is sustainable. Clearly, in the midst of a health crisis, people are very heightened. They have very heightened awareness of health issues generally, and they're looking for reassurance. So they're reaching to their governments, they're reaching to their employers where they have them. Do you think that as and when this pandemic resolves, that people will still be as interested and still be as accepting of for example, employer type facilities that as the ones you were describing? And how do you pick your winners in that, if you can pick your winners?
Yes, I mean, I think yes. So we have an exuberance at the moment with the crisis, and maybe things might settle down a little bit and quieten down after. But the fact is that there has been a large push out into an previously untapped audience, and so even if there is a settling down, then there will still be a level which was far greater than what it was before. And that's also allowed the generation of infrastructures, the development of technologies which can now continue to provide and grow on the foundations that were initially laid during this period. So I do think there is longevity and really looking for those companies which have that roadmap to really continue developing, to retain those early movers that they adopted through this period, to retain those consumers in B2B, their clients, and then have that roadmap also to look into the future to how do you sustain this and where do you go next?
Yeah, and you touched on one area which I think we can all see has had its profile raised immensely in the last 6 months, which is the concept of mental health or well-being, wellness generally, as a phenomena that is now mainstream, as opposed to perhaps were more niche offerings before. And I'm very conscious that we have Miri and Galit on the panel too. Both of your businesses, I think, have focused on this concept of wellness as a much broader concept. So just before we move off this topic of existing trends being accelerated, I wondered if either Miri or Galit, you'd like to just comment on that particular aspect of the mental wellness.
Happy to start, and then Galit can hopefully add some more. Yeah, so we're absolutely, first of all, I agree with Amanda that I think this is something that will continue, assuming again that, the the services and the products that will be available and used during this time will gain the trust of of the customers, whether they're workplaces, employers, and the consumers, of course, themselves. But we are seeing for sure a significant increase in interest and in demand by consumers in these various wellness solutions, specifically for emotional well-being during these times, whether it's a significant increase in downloads of meditation apps, or millions of people signing up to take the Science of Wellbeing course, a very famous course at Yale University. So everyone is opening up and learning about it and taking control of their well-being, trying to basically find solutions for themselves to address this heightened stress and anxiety that's so prevalent right now across societies. So we see this as an amazing opportunity. We still think that this field is very young in the sense that the first generation companies have not yet completely realized the potential of that technology has to deliver experiences that are highly relevant for individuals, highly personalized and efficacious. There's a lot of work right now, with content being delivered in various ways, but I think in terms of creating experiences that are more meaningful through technology to enhance emotional well-being, I think there's just so much more that can still be done. But I definitely see it as as something that, as Amanda said, has been highly accelerated and catalyzed during this time.
I agree with everything Amanda and Mary said. I'll just add that the trend started before COVID, before the pandemic, and therefore I think it's here to stay. I don't think it will disappear just because the corona hopefully will leave us in a year or so. I think it accelerated wellness technology. It might slow down a little, but it will still continue to grow. And I think there are many interesting technologies and startups. So I think it's here to stay.
Fantastic. And either of you thus far, are you seeing this manifest itself in sort of products or services, or and are there any areas that are sort of really accelerating within that broad conversation about mental well-being?
So we've Welltech One, we've seen both products and services, a lot of, both B2B and B2C, a lot of applications in stress, in sleep, and mostly because of COVID, remote care. And I think in terms of remote care, that will stay with us. It's a lot more convenient, and it saves money for healthcare organizations as well. So it's habit changing, and it's going in that direction.
And could you, at the moment, could you predict where it might go next?
I think that, in general, I think Mary said that also. So wellness technology is, fairly new, I guess. And I think that the trends that we are seeing now are going to continue to grow. I don't know what's going to come next. I think that currently what we're seeing now will continue to develop.
I'll add maybe just one area which we're very excited about and we see developing in these times of remote interaction, whether it's family or work, is the whole field of social wellness, social well-being, right? So we need to reinvent the way that we create meaningful relationships and interactions in our lives. And we used to talk about loneliness a lot in the context of the older population, but today this is something that we all are affected by. The fact that we can't get together with our colleagues, with our family members, and people are really looking for new ways to not just, it's not enough to have these video communication tools, right? We need to think of more creative ways and more meaningful ways to interact. So the whole notion of social well-being, being able to not only interact one-on-one more meaningfully, but also to connect to other people who have similar experiences in life and similar challenges, so that we feel like we're not alone in, you know, in our various life steps. These are fields. The whole social well-being space is very interesting to us. I think it'll develop.
Thank you. That's great. Just before we move off of the impact that COVID is having on the area generally, I mean, I think Janke, you wanted to comment on how, from your perspective, it's impacting on access.
Yeah, so I think next to sort of affordability and efficacy, I think access to healthcare and well-being is a very important one. And the assumption, obviously, during COVID was that by moving away access to brick and mortar healthcare facilities, we're going to create a huge problem. But there's a sort of a silver lining there, which is that there are whole populations that traditionally were maybe put off by the brick and mortar versions of our healthcare and wellness provisions out there, are now engaging in new ways. There's many topics that carry a taboo as well. For example, you know, the topic of hearing loss, which is linked to what Miri just talked about in terms of loneliness and even dementia. So if you have problems with hearing, your circle of reference becomes smaller and smaller, and you're feeling increasingly isolated, eventually leading to mental health problems. And people just don't like the stigma of hearing aids. And this is something that Ergo, for example, has realized and said, you know, people don't want to go to an audiologist. They want to be able to buy a hearing aid that is completely invisible, so that you cannot see from the outside, and they want to do it all from the comfort of their home. And I think in that sense, there's a lot of topics that have to do with taboo, whether it's around sexual health, or, you know, even infectious disease, where you don't want to go to a brick and mortar healthcare facility. And I think those things are doing very, very well. So Ergo has been growing very rapidly through the COVID crisis. And I think that's here to stay. So where you're going directly to consumers who don't want to talk even to their GP about their sleep problems, for example. They don't want to talk about problems with a hearing. But if they have a trusted brand out there that they can turn to, that they can trust, we can actually improve access to healthcare in spite of COVID.
Wow. I think what's clear after even just, you know, less than 30 minutes of discussion is just how broad the opportunities here are. And Vijay, I wonder, when you're looking at this as an investor, how do you look at the companies that you see coming to you for investment or for are already in your portfolio? And are there some things that they are not addressing as well as they should or could? Perhaps you'd like to sort of comment on those and how that might be sort of inhibiting some of the growth opportunities that are clearly there.
Yeah, absolutely, David. I think it's really interesting, Janke, Miri, and Galit, and Amanda commenting about this shift of B2C to B2B, because that's exactly sort of where we've been playing as investors, really focusing on B2B models or companies that target B2B. And so we're used to evaluating companies, looking at clinical evidence, commercial models, which are all important. But we soon realize, and this is learning over time, is that for all the reasons why B2B, B2C companies work so well, the engagement, the products they make that people love are using again and again. Janke commented about 5-year retention rates of 10 years time. I mean, you just don't see them in traditional companies targeting the B2B market. So we've spent a lot of time looking at this crossover, B2C companies that are successful and are moving into B2B. And we're evaluating a lot of these opportunities. And I think, you know, going back to the point of what some of them are, or what the hurdles are for us not making many more of these investments, I think it comes down to probably the data strategy, privacy and security. I think privacy and security people understand, but I think data strategy is something we ourselves have learnt the importance of over the last couple of years that we've been investing in this space. And I think one thing that people don't realize is not a criticism, but it's just that people don't realize that depending on what data you're collecting and what the application is, there is a way of going through that. Just to step back for a moment, we found this so important. We used to hire consultants to help with our DD process. We actually now have hired someone to our team who has a data science background just to help, because we are seeing so many opportunities that we tend to home in on the data science aspect of it. So it's understanding what data you're collecting and whether it's actionable. So really understanding if it's collected in such a manner that it could be utilized from a clinical perspective. And that has implications in terms of how you start at the very beginning. Whether it's consented, that's really important as well for privacy and making sure that what you do with this big asset that's been collected over time can actually be used for whatever commercial purpose later on. And I think we're realizing that a lot of companies have a product out there which is doing what it's doing and collecting data passively. And that data itself has got a lot of insights which could be productized down in the future. For example, if something was a communication tool or allowed a forum to exist where individuals were chatting to each other, there are solutions where you could actually look at technologies where you could look at that conversations and extract risk indicators where someone could be tending towards behavior that could be exhibiting signs that you would worry about for their mental health, for example. So that alone is a new product strategy that could come out of it. So I think not many people go into this thinking about the data as part of their strategy going forward, but we are increasingly seeing a lot of companies that have opportunities of monetizing it, either to pharma, to payers, or as a whole new product revenue stream. So I think for us, one of the things that we're increasingly spending more time when we look at companies in this B2C to B2B space is, first question is, what is your data strategy? Question is, what does that mean? And we go back and forth trying to understand. And many times we're looking at companies in our pipeline where we're going to help them and encourage them to develop this strategy over time. And when they make that flip into the B2B world, into the B2B model, there's another asset that's building value all the time alongside from the data perspective. So I mentioned the word data so many times, but you can tell what kind of investors we are. We're kind of data heavy investors, which we try to leverage in all our investments. But if I summarized it back, it's all about having a data strategy for us.
Yeah, I think we got data. Data got more mentions there than COVID, which is pretty good. Are there any other growth inhibitors, Vijay? I mean, we talked in some of these applications are heavily dependent on connectivity, for example. Is that something that you take into account that you've got a view on?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if we look to the US, we're quite US biased because that's predominantly where we come from. A lot of the technologies we have and the solutions that we're looking at the moment are looking at shifting care outside of any care setting into the home. And that isn't an easy place to deliver the information or the connectivity back to where it needs to be. So we're looking at a lot of technologies that are asynchronous. So they don't necessarily send data in real time, but they can send that data over time depending on the technology that they're utilizing. It's not exactly easy because it inhibits a type of applications you can have. There are companies out there trying to do real-time connectivity where the information is flowing back and forth to nurses' stations or doctor stations where they can make judgments. We're probably less keen on those types of solutions in terms of the type of investments we look at. It really is trying to shift care on a chronic basis over longer term where that data can be transferred, insights can be gathered, and then actions can be relayed back. And it doesn't have to happen real time. And that sort of gets over the problem of connectivity, wireless connections or 3G signals or 4G or 5G. So that's the way we're approaching. How do you get past poor connectivity when you're taking care outside of a hospital setting?
That's really interesting. The other one I think you touched on in your first question was around privacy and security. And we hear a lot about the opportunities that blockchain represents for allowing data to be safely and securely moved around. Is that showing up in any of the investment opportunities that you're seeing so far?
I would say probably about 2 years ago, every pitch deck I had blockchain, AI, and a few other keywords littered in all over the pages. I think we're not really seeing, well, we haven't seen in the last 12 months or so blockchain appear at the forefront of any pitch that we're looking at, but security is, and cybersecurity, data privacy. We're seeing a lot of technologies from various parts of the world on how do you protect patient data within the electronic health records, or how do you protect patient data coming out of devices, and how do you make sure that they aren't hackable. So there's multiple different ways of approaching the security of the patient's data in hospital or outside home settings. And I don't think we've found a solution that actually does it all really well, because there's always this dispute between whose responsibility is that? Is it the manufacturer of the technology that's generating the data, or is it the person that's safeguarding and collecting the data? Who really needs to pay for this?
Sure.
What it comes down to, but no, it's definitely at the forefront of what we're looking at.
Okay, but no clear winning solution yet, it would appear. Okay. Yeah. And I think just finally on this piece of the discussion, a lot of what you're describing, I think, lends itself to sort of broad remote monitoring. So not necessarily a particular condition; it could be agnostic. Do you also see, though, condition-specific opportunities that have been driven by these same trends?
Absolutely. I think some of the early remote monitoring solutions we saw were focused around cardiology, cardiovascular, heart failure, remote monitoring, respiratory, so COPD or asthma, trying to identify when someone would exacerbate and therefore require hospitalization. And it was identifying trends downwards in terms of their overall care. So that's one aspect of remote monitoring that we've seen a lot of, and there's a lot of innovation around that. But increasingly, we're trying to see, and we are seeing a lot of innovation around diagnostics, be that ophthalmology, for example. Can you actually monitor someone's eye condition or diagnose eye conditions remotely so that they don't need to come into hospital, and various other tests, maternal health as well. Can you do a lot of that remotely rather than coming into hospital because of COVID and no one wants to go into these institutions anymore? But also addresses the whole idea of access and the challenge of getting access to these specialist centers. So we're looking at this across the spectrum of how do you shift not just diagnostics, not just testing, but also monitoring and on a regular basis for all modalities. So we are seeing that happening a lot.
Yeah. I mean, again, comes back to the point we've made a couple of times, just how broad the opportunity is. I mean, it just is everywhere. And I think what that tends to lead one to think is that no one's going to do it by themselves. This is a world where it's going to need multiple relationships at lots of different levels for success. And Galit, if I might turn to you for as we move towards the end of the session, just a comment on that observation around the importance of partnerships, whether they be partnerships for your portfolio companies or partnerships between yourselves as investors, to try and make the most of the opportunities that you see.
Right. So, I mean, as everyone knows, the wellness market is valued at 4.5 trillion, according to the Global Wellness Institute, which is a huge market. It's an increasing trend, as we've said during this session, and it is here to stay and will continue to develop. However, that said, wellness-infused technology companies are still growing, and we have seen many applications in the wellness industry that do not validate their data or efficacy, and their value to the user is questionable. Now, with the growing trend of wellness and numerous B2C applications and devices, startups are increasingly aware of that need to validate their data and methodology. And apart from trials, whether clinical or not, the best way to validate your product is with a strategic global partner. So until recently, for example, hospitals and healthcare organizations did not acknowledge wellness technology. The pandemic definitely changed that. The need for home care and remote care have increased drastically. And partnerships between wellness technology companies and healthcare organizations are a major force in the industry. In addition, global partners is always viewed as an upside for potential investors. So definitely, partnerships also between, like you said, between the VCs, between the investors is always great in any field, not only wellness.
Does anyone else on the panel have a sort of similar experience of both the opportunities, but also perhaps the struggles that you can have when you're trying to syndicate across such a broad spectrum of opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, I can comment briefly. I think we've touched upon consumer health from a number of different angles today, and I think you see already by the participant on this panels that you can come from different backgrounds to this opportunity, but none of us has the totality of what it needs to make a consumer health investment successful. So I think syndication between people who understand digital health, between people who understand medtech, who understand therapeutics, who understand payers, and who understand consumer behavior, that can be very, very beneficial. And we are trying to build that within our own fund, but we're also partnering very strongly, across syndicates with other players, like in Withings, we're with It Invest in France, and that's been very, very helpful. So the knowledge about what are the e-commerce drivers that you can affect in a business like Eargo. How do you go in the middle of Withings went within 2 weeks from significantly brick and mortar based to completely online, and actually did very well out of that. Now, how do you do that? This is not the traditional medtech or health tech sort of set of expertise. And I think only when we bring together these different views will we be successful. And the same thing is true for how do you generate a good clinical trials? People in pharma and medtech know that extremely well. People from the consumer health or tech world usually have more difficulty around that. I think by working together and partnering, we can help everyone and ultimately make patients better.
Well, I think that's a very inspiring place to stop. We can hand it back to Josh with the word he gave us, which was convergence. I would very much like to thank each of Miri and Amanda and Galid, Janke and Vijay for a fantastic panel. Thank you also for all the questions. I hope I've interweaved those into the dialogue. If I missed any, I do apologize, but I did try. Josh, back to you.
Fantastic. Thank you, David. So thank you all for your questions. They are all on the chat and questions function. So if there are any that the panel do feel they could provide some more insight to, or anything else, then please do join us on the Swapcard platform, and you can sort of answer in the chat, or indeed connect and schedule a one-to-one video meeting, which is what we set up the event to do. A huge thank you to all of our panel and to David for guiding us through this morning's session. We are, continuing on for the rest of the day. We have our Mukra sort of webinar presentation on the FDA Breakthrough Program for Medical Devices, which is coming up a little later, and then closing off this evening with our US investor capital markets panel, which is, I guess, interweaving a lot of the financial aspects that have been discussed on various different panels over the last few days. We also have the highlighted showcases of those that have been most watched and most upvoted by you, the audience, over the last few days, which will be coming up this afternoon. But with that, thank you very much again to everyone for watching, and to our panel this morning, and we'll see you a little later on.